April 7, 1945, Tokyo Bay, Empire of Japan. Dawn spreads its light across the Japanese home islands as 91 North American P-51D Mustangs of the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups near their rendezvous point. In the cockpit of his Mustang, Major James B. Tapp grips the control stick tightly. His 6 wing-mounted 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns bristle with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The early P-51D models carry 500 rounds for each inboard gun, and 270 for the center and outboard positions, totaling 2,800 rounds. Later versions would reduce this to 400 rounds per inboard gun to enhance reliability, bringing the total to 1,880 rounds. Below, Mount Fuji rises sharply against the crisp morning sky, its snow-capped summit serving as a navigational landmark pilots would reference throughout the mission. The morning sun casts elongated shadows over the Japanese countryside, revealing a mosaic of rice paddies, villages, and military installations that had never encountered American fighters. The mission is unprecedented. Escort B-29 Superfortresses deep into Japanese territory from a base 750 miles away, a range military planners had deemed impossible for single-engine fighters just 2 years earlier. At 0700 hours, more than 100 Japanese interceptors converge on the American formation. Through the morning haze appears a sight that astonishes Japanese pilots: single-engine American fighters over Tokyo, something their commanders had insisted was impossible. The psychological effect is immediate and profound. These are not carrier-based Navy planes with limited range, but land-based Army Air Force fighters that have somehow traversed 750 miles of open ocean to reach the imperial capital. Leading the Japanese defense are pilots in Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, the Frank, Japan's fastest and most advanced fighter, alongside older Ki-43 Hayabusas, Ki-44 Shoki, Ki-61 Hien, and N1K2J Shidans. The Ki-84 could outclimb and outmaneuver both the P-51 and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt at certain altitudes and speeds. What follows demonstrates the vast technological gap between the two nations' approaches to air combat and reveals why American industrial power had produced what many aviators would call the perfect long-range fighter. The North American P-51D Mustang arrived in the Pacific Theater already carrying a legendary reputation forged over Europe, where it had broken the back of the Luftwaffe and enabled daylight bombing campaigns over Germany. Originally designed for export to Britain, models adapted by the British with Rolls-Royce Merlin engines became America's most capable wartime fighters. The transformation from the Allison-powered early models to the Merlin-powered masterpiece represented one of aviation's most successful international collaborations, a fusion of American aerodynamic innovation and British engine technology. The combination of the legendary Merlin engine and the P-51 Mustang produced the P-51D, giving the U.S. Army Air Forces a high-performance, high-altitude, long-range fighter capable of escorting heavy bombers all the way to Berlin and back. And now, astonishingly, from Iwima to Tokyo and return. The Packard V1657 engine, a license-built version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66, produced 1,695 horsepower at takeoff with water injection, rising to 1,120 horsepower in emergency war power settings. This two-stage, two-speed supercharged engine maintained performance at altitudes where Japanese engines struggled, their single-stage superchargers unable to compress the thin air effectively. The P-51D could reach speeds of around 440 mph at 25,000 feet, attain a service ceiling near 42,000 feet, and carried 6 wing-mounted 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns. Its firepower was precise and devastating. With 6 guns firing 800 rounds per minute, the P-51D delivered 4,800 rounds per minute of concentrated firepower, 80 rounds per second. Each armor-piercing incendiary round weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, imparting tremendous kinetic energy capable of penetrating armor, igniting fuel tanks, and destroying engines with only a few accurate hits. By late 1944, 14 of the 15 fighter squadrons of the U.S. 8th Air Force in Europe flew Mustangs, a testament to the aircraft's superiority over other fighters. This massive production reflected the peak of American industrial capacity, with assembly lines operating 24/7. North American aviation factories in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, produced P-51s at a breathtaking pace. At peak output, a new Mustang rolled off the line every hour. By war's end, 15,186 P-51s of all variants had been built, with the D model alone totaling 8,156 aircraft, exceeding Japan's entire fighter production in the last 2 years of the war combined. The long-range capability that brought Mustangs to Tokyo revolutionized fighter operations, altering the fundamental calculus of air warfare. With dual 110-gallon drop tanks, Mustangs routinely flew 1,500-mile round trips, sometimes stretching to 1,600 miles when necessary, equivalent to flying from Los Angeles to Little Rock, Arkansas, entirely over water in a single-engine plane with no alternative landing sites other than the ocean. The Merlin engine's exceptional fuel efficiency, consuming just 65 gallons at economical cruise, combined with the Mustang's laminar flow wing design, which reduced drag by 35% compared to conventional airfoils, made this possible. North American aerodynamicist Edgar Schmood's laminar flow wing maintained smooth airflow over a larger portion of the wing, delaying turbulent transition and drastically reducing parasitic drag. In stark contrast, the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate entered service with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service in June 1944, too late and in too few numbers to change the war's outcome. Named Gale and designated Frank by the Allies, it represented Japan's desperate attempt to rival American technological superiority with dwindling resources. The Ki-84 is considered Japan's best operational fighter of the conflict, though large numbers was relative. What Japan called mass production would have been a prototype run in the United States. The aircraft featured impressive speed and exceptional agility, armed with up to 230mm Ho 155 cannons and 2i Ho 5 guns, giving it formidable firepower. On paper, the numbers looked impressive, but reality was far more complicated. The 30mm cannons carried only 50 rounds each, while the 20mm guns had just 350 rounds apiece, resulting in a total ammunition load of only 400 rounds, far less than the Mustang's 1,880 to 800 rounds. On paper, the Ki-84 seemed competitive, even superior in certain respects. It was powered by the Nakajima Hei-45 Homare 18-cylinder radial engine, a complex piece of engineering with fuel injection and a single-stage, 2-speed supercharger aided by water methanol injection, providing the Ki-84 with a rated 2,000 horsepower at takeoff. Initial prototype tests showed promise, reaching 387 mph in level flight, with later claims of up to 427 mph under ideal conditions with high-octane fuel and precise engine tuning. However, the reality of the late-war Japanese production told a starkly different story: declining quality, improvisation born of necessity, and systemic failures. Pilots and ground crews learned to handle the aircraft's high-maintenance Homare engine and landing gear, which were prone to buckling at the worst possible moments. The Homare engine, though theoretically powerful and advanced, suffered chronic reliability issues that worsened as quality control deteriorated. It required tight tolerances that Japanese factories, under relentless B-29 bombardment and short of quality steel and aluminum, could no longer achieve. Many landing gear assemblies were compromised by poor heat treatment of late-war Japanese steel, often containing impurities that prevented proper hardening. As a result, many Ki-84s experienced strut collapses on landing, destroying aircraft that Japan could ill afford to lose and killing pilots who had taken months to train. This disparity in production quality reflected the broader industrial crisis facing Japan, a nation that had bet everything on a short war and lost. while American factories maintained consistent quality standards despite enormous production volumes, often improving precision as techniques evolved. Japanese manufacturing declined sharply. The progressive deterioration in quality control meant pilots never knew how a specific aircraft would perform, whether the brakes would hold, whether the engine could sustain high power, or even whether it could climb sufficiently to intercept B-29 Superfortresses cruising at 30,000 feet. By 1945, Japan had produced only 3,514 Ki-84s, many of which were grounded due to shortages of spare parts, fuel, or trained pilots. Of the operational planes, perhaps half were truly combat-ready at any moment. Fuel shortages alone highlighted Japan's strategic catastrophe. While American pilots flew with 100-octane aviation gasoline shipped from Texas and California, Japanese crews relied on whatever could be produced domestically or synthesized from coal. Late-war Japanese aviation fuel often tested at 87 octane or lower, sometimes dipping to 80, reducing engine power and causing pre-ignition that damaged cylinders, pistons, and valves. Some desperate units supplemented fuel with pine root oil, alcohol distilled from sweet potatoes, or even Saga byproducts, further degrading engine performance and reliability. Pilots reported engines that barely started, ran roughly at all power settings, and often failed catastrophically in flight. On that first April 7th mission, the Mustangs formed up with their charges. 103 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses of the 73rd Bomb Wing, each loaded with tons of incendiary bombs targeting Japanese industrial centers. Captain Art Bridge of the 45th Fighter Squadron recalled, "It was a spectacular sight. The 29s were finishing their assembly in a vast circle as we arrived. The sun glinted off their aluminum skin, and they looked like a school of giant silver fish gliding through the sky." The rendezvous itself was a triumph of navigation and planning, impossible without American technological advantages. The P-51s had flown 750 miles over open ocean, relying primarily on dead reckoning and basic radio compasses, timing their arrival to the bomber's schedule within minutes. They climbed gradually from sea level to 25,000 feet, their engines automatically adjusting mixtures, their superchargers shifting seamlessly from low to high blower to maintain optimal power. Crossing the coast of Honshu, the P-51 pilots jettisoned their 110-gallon auxiliary wing tanks. As they spotted the first head-on attacks from over 100 Japanese interceptors scrambling from multiple airfields around Tokyo, the Silver Drop tanks tumbled to the ground, glinting in the morning sun. Some exploded on impact, others bounced across rice paddies. The Japanese pilots, flying a mixed force of Ki-84s, Ki-43s, Ki-44s, Ki-61s, and Navy aircraft including Zeros and the new N-1K2J Shidenkai, were shocked. These were not carrier-based fighters with limited range, but land-based planes that had somehow reached the homeland from seemingly impossible distances. Flight Sergeant Totanimizu, flying a Ki-84 with the 56th Sentai, later recalled his disbelief. "When we were scrambled, we were told enemy fighters were approaching Tokyo. We thought it must be a mistake. Maybe they meant bombers. When I saw the Mustangs with my own eyes, I thought I was dreaming. It was impossible. Our commanders had assured us no American fighter could reach Japan from their island bases. Yet there they were, dozens of them, flying as if they owned our sky. In that moment, I knew the war was truly lost." Major James B. Tapp, later an ace with 8 confirmed victories, was among the first Mustang pilots to strike a formation of Japanese fighters. His combat report, drafted hours after the mission, described the engagement with clinical precision. "They attacked us in the classic 3-plane V formation, but their coordination was sloppy. The flight leader would commit to a strike, yet his wingmen often failed to follow through. They appeared hesitant, perhaps low on fuel or ammunition, or simply inexperienced. We dove through their formation with a 100-mph speed advantage, fired brief bursts, and zoom climbed back to altitude before they could respond." This failure in Japanese tactical cohesion reflected the catastrophic breakdown in pilot training. By 1945, most seasoned Japanese aviators were dead, lost over the Solomons, New Guinea, the Philippines, or in the Mariana Islands, Turkey Shoot. Replacements received as little as 50 hours of flight instruction before being thrown into combat, compared to the 600 hours American pilots trained before deployment. When the smoke cleared and the Mustangs returned to their Iwima base, the 7th Fighter Command crews were credited with 26 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 1 probable and 5 damaged, at a cost of 2 P-51s and 1 pilot. The 13-to-1 kill ratio on this initial mission would only improve as American pilots gained experience over Japan, while Japanese pilot quality continued to decline. Within weeks, ratios of 20-to-1 or even 30-to-1 became common, reflecting not just American skill, but Japanese desperation. The performance gap between the aircraft was starkly evident in combat, particularly in vertical maneuvers which increasingly defined aerial engagements. The P-51D's advantage was most pronounced above 20,000 feet, the altitude where most interceptions occurred. Here, the Merlin engine's 2-stage supercharger maintained sea-level power while Japanese engines struggled. The first stage compressed thin air, cooled it through an intercooler, then fed it to the second stage for further compression, delivering oxygen-rich air to the cylinders. The Ki-84's single-stage supercharger, lacking an intercooler and second stage, suffered severe power loss above 20,000 feet, cutting speed and climb rate precisely where it mattered most. At 30,000 feet, the Ki-84 barely reached 350 mph, while the P-51D could still hit 480 mph. Lieutenant Jerry Yellen of the 78th Fighter Squadron, who would later fly the final combat mission of the war on August 14, 1945, August 15 in Japan, described a typical encounter vividly. "We'd spot them climbing to meet us, leaving dark exhaust trails as they pushed throttles full forward. By 25,000 feet, they were floundering like fish out of water. Their engines smoked, probably running too rich because the superchargers couldn't supply enough air. We dove through their formation with our 650s firing, tracers streaking like laser beams, and they couldn't match our speed in the dive or our zoom climb. Our Merlin engines sang as we pulled up, G-forces pinning us to our seats, while their radials coughed and sputtered, struggling to maintain power. The P-51D could dive near 500 mph while retaining full control authority, its laminar flow wings remaining effective even near transonic speeds. Japanese fighters often suffered control reversal or structural failure above 400 mph, their surfaces blanking out or wings tearing apart. The disparity in pilot skill was equally stark and worsened daily. American pilots arriving at Iwima generally had 400 to 600 hours of flight experience, including 100+ hours in type, extensive gunnery practice, and combat training against experienced instructors using captured enemy aircraft or precise simulations. They had drilled formation flying until instinctive, instrument navigation in all weather, deflection shooting on towed targets, and tactical maneuvers developed from 3 years of air combat experience. Japanese pilots in 1945 often had less than 100 total hours, sometimes as few as 30, with minimal gunnery practice due to ammunition shortages, no instrument training, and tactics learned from manuals rather than seasoned instructors, most of whom were dead or actively flying combat missions. Navigation alone separated the capable from the doomed. Flying single-engine fighters on 1,500-mile round trips over open ocean with scant navigational aids required confidence forged from experience and trust in both machine and support systems. American pilots relied on detailed weather briefings from submarine reports and reconnaissance flights, accurate maps updated via photo intelligence, and precise instruments. Lifeguard submarines along their routes, and Dumbo PBY Catalina flying boats rescued dozens of downed airmen. Japanese pilots increasingly flew with outdated maps missing bomb damage, unreliable compasses, and no hope of rescue if downed at sea. Their life rafts, if present, often leaked, and emergency rations had been depleted during ground shortages. Magnetic variation between Iwima and Tokyo in 1945 was 3 degrees west, and with Tokyo between the 139th and 140th meridians, and Iwima between the 141st and 142nd. Navigation relied on simple compass headings for the return, a fortunate geographical coincidence that saved many American lives. This advantage proved crucial when weather deteriorated or pilots became disoriented in combat, compasses spinning wildly. A pilot could simply fly south-southeast and eventually spot Iwima's distinctive Mount Suribachi rising from the ocean, assuming fuel held out. The logistics underpinning each force revealed the stark contrast of the Pacific Air War, a struggle between American abundance and Japanese scarcity. Every mission from Iwima involved nearly 100 Mustangs consuming 57,000 gallons of high-octane fuel and carrying 230,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, in addition to bombs and rockets for ground attack operations. This represented only a single day's sorties from one base, and Iwima alone hosted 3 fighter groups. Behind it all was a supply chain stretching from factories in Detroit, refineries in Texas, and ammunition plants in Missouri, connected by Liberty ships produced at a rate of 3 per day, and C-54 transport aircraft flying regular cargo routes across the Pacific. Ships arrived at Iwima daily, offloading fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, mail, and countless other essentials to sustain a modern air force. Meanwhile, Japanese logistics had collapsed into chaos. Aviation fuel was so scarce that training flights were canceled, leaving new pilots to confront combat with no recent flying experience. Ammunition was rationed even for combat, with pilots instructed to conserve rounds for only the most certain shots. The Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces, never well coordinated even in peacetime, now competed desperately for dwindling resources like starving dogs fighting over scraps. Aircraft were cannibalized for spare parts until reduced to aluminum skeletons, and entire fighter groups were grounded for lack of tires, spark plugs, or hydraulic fluid. Some units attempted to fabricate spare parts in crude workshops with predictably poor results. The technological gap extended beyond the aircraft themselves to every operational detail. American pilots wore G-suits to prevent blackouts during high-G maneuvers, used standardized oxygen systems that functioned reliably above 30,000 feet with automatic flow control, and communicated via VHF radios with clear reception and multiple channels. Parachutes were regularly inspected and repacked, life rafts carried working radios and fresh supplies, and survival kits included everything from morphine to fishing gear. Japanese pilots often flew without functioning radios. Their vacuum tube sets drained precious battery power and rarely worked. Oxygen systems were unreliable above 20,000 feet, leading to hypoxia and disorientation, and they had no G-suits, limiting their ability to perform aggressive maneuvers without blacking out or suffering eye damage. On June 1, 1945, dubbed Black Friday by the Mustang men, weather, rather than enemy action, proved the greatest threat. Approximately 150 Mustangs en route to Osaka encountered a blinding frontal system absent from forecasts. 27 aircraft were lost in minutes, 24 due to weather, as pilots became disoriented in towering cumulus clouds, collided, or ran out of fuel searching for clear air. This disaster demonstrated that even for technologically superior Americans, very long-range missions pushed men and machines to the absolute limit. The front extended from sea level to 40,000 feet, with violent turbulence, icing, and zero visibility. Pilots reported St. Elmo's fire flickering on their wings, compasses spinning uselessly, and artificial horizons tumbling as gyroscopes failed under extreme motion. Japanese morale suffered irreparably. Captain Yoshio Yoshida, a Ki-84 pilot with the 47th Sentai who survived the war, wrote, "The appearance of American fighters over Tokyo shattered our confidence. We were told the B-29s were vulnerable without escort and that their fighters could never reach us. Yet here were Mustangs over the palace itself, strafing airfields, shooting down our best pilots as if they were rookies. How can we defend the Emperor when enemy fighters roam freely over the sacred homeland? Seeing those Mustangs, so numerous, so confident, tells what our leaders will not. The war is lost, and we are merely waiting to die. VLR, very long-range missions, tested every aspect of skill, recalled Major Tapp in a post-war interview. Engaging Japanese pilots sent adrenaline surging, but navigating from point A to B over the endless ocean was the greatest challenge. Pilots constantly checked their compasses, questioning if they were wrong or if they had become disoriented. Physical and mental strain was immense. Crews remained strapped into cockpits for 8 hours or more, unable to stand, stretch, or relieve themselves, except into relief tubes that often froze at altitude. They endured cramping legs, numb buttocks, and the constant anxiety of flying single-engine fighters over vast ocean expanses where any mechanical failure could be fatal. The Mustang's cockpit ergonomics, refined through 3 years of combat and thousands of pilot reports, surpassed Japanese designs in every measurable way. The P-51D featured a bubble canopy providing 360-degree visibility, allowing pilots to look behind without turning their bodies, a life-saving capability in dogfights. Seats were fully adjustable for different heights. Rudder pedals accommodated varying leg lengths, and controls were positioned to minimize fatigue during long missions. The instrument panel was logically arranged, placing airspeed, altitude, and engine gauges directly in the pilot's line of sight. By contrast, the Ki-84 cockpit, while an improvement over earlier Japanese fighters like the Zero, still suffered from poor rearward visibility due to structural members and the fuel tank behind the pilot. Awkwardly placed controls requiring hands-off stick operation and hard-to-read instruments, especially under high G-loads or engine vibration. Armament differences often determined survival in split-second encounters. The P-51D's 50-caliber M2 Browning guns, though seemingly less impressive than the Ki-84's mixed cannon armament, provided decisive advantages. American guns were exceptionally reliable, with stoppage rates under 1% when properly maintained, and carried far more ammunition, 1,880 to 2,800 rounds versus the Ki-84's 400 total. This allowed American pilots to take ranging shots, engage multiple targets, and fight without fear of running dry after a few bursts. The ballistics of the 50-caliber rounds were well understood, enabling consistent engagement at 400 yards. Japanese pilots, grappling with mixed cannons and machine guns with differing convergence points, struggled to shoot accurately beyond close range. Gunnery training differences amplified the gap. American pilots had fired thousands of rounds in practice, learning to lead targets, estimate distance, and fire short bursts to prevent gun overheating. They trained on towed sleeves, camera guns, and simulated dogfights until deflection shooting became instinctive. Japanese pilots in 1945 were fortunate to fire even 100 rounds in training, if that. Ammunition was far too valuable to be spent on practice when it was desperately needed in combat. Many went into their first engagements having never fired their guns at all, forced to learn deflection shooting while someone tried to kill them. The Sunsetter's final aerial combat occurred near Tokyo on August 10, 1945, when the 15th and 56th Fighter Groups claimed 7 kills in one of the last air battles of World War II. By that stage, Japanese resistance had become almost symbolic, a shadow of the force that had once swept across the Pacific. Fuel shortages grounded most fighters, draining tanks to supply kamikaze aircraft. Those that did take to the air were often flown by teenagers with minimal training, boys who had been in high school only months before. Overall, Iwima's Mustangs were credited with 206 Japanese aircraft destroyed between April and August 1945, accounting for 75% of all Pacific P-51 aerial victories. The actual figure was likely higher, as many Japanese planes downed over Japan were never confirmed, their wreckage lost in forests or urban areas. The strategic impact extended far beyond aerial tallies, reshaping the Pacific War. The presence of P-51s over Japan allowed B-29s to bomb in daylight with unprecedented precision, systematically dismantling Japan's industrial infrastructure. Already crippled by material shortages and B-29 raids, Japanese industry ground to a halt under relentless daylight attacks. The psychological effect on civilians was devastating. They witnessed American fighters strafing airfields, attacking trains, and striking shipping in Tokyo Bay, making clear that Japan no longer controlled its skies. The myth of the divine wind that would protect Japan was shattered when American fighters flew over the Imperial Palace itself. Lieutenant Colonel John R. Morgan of the 457th Fighter Squadron flew several photo reconnaissance missions in specially modified P-51Ds with cameras in place of guns. His reports revealed the extent of Japanese aviation collapse. "We flew over airfields that intelligence reported as having hundreds of planes," he wrote. "We'd find maybe a dozen airworthy. The rest were derelicts, no engines, no propellers, stripped for parts. Sometimes they moved wrecks around to make it appear they had more operational aircraft, but we could easily distinguish a real plane from a hulking shell. Some fields even displayed fake wooden aircraft painted with markings, attempting to divert our attacks from real planes hidden in revetments or under camouflage." The industrial mathematics were indisputable and told the story of the war in stark numbers. The United States produced 15,586 P-51s of all variants during the conflict, surpassing Japan's total aircraft production in 1944–45 combined. Japan managed approximately 3,500 Ki-84s, many of which were destroyed on the ground by B-29 raids, lost in training accidents due to poor quality control, or grounded from lack of parts. American production lines reached peak efficiency just as Japanese manufacturing collapsed. North American aviation alone was producing 20 P-51s per day at peak output, exceeding Japan's monthly Ki-84 production. Each American aircraft was virtually identical, with interchangeable components, whereas Japanese planes varied wildly in quality and performance, even within the same batch. The training disparity mirrored this industrial imbalance. By 1945, the United States trained 30,000 pilots annually, each receiving 200 to 300 hours of flight instruction before advanced fighter training, plus another 100 hours of combat preparation. Japan's pilot pipeline had largely collapsed. New aviators often received barely 50 hours of instruction before deployment, sometimes much less. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable. America could replace losses while maintaining quality. Japan could not. For every pilot Japan produced, America trained 10, and the American pilots were vastly better prepared. Fuel consumption underscored the strategic imbalance. Each P-51 sortie from Iwima consumed roughly 600 gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel per aircraft, including internal tanks and drop tanks. With 100 aircraft flying daily, that meant 60,000 gallons per day for a single fighter group. American tankers delivered millions of gallons monthly across the Pacific, a river of fuel sustaining operations. Japan, by contrast, attempted to extract aviation fuel from pine roots, needing roughly 200 stumps to produce 1 gallon of barely usable fuel, while converting training planes to kamikaze rolls due to shortages. By August 1945, Japan had fewer than 200,000 gallons of aviation fuel remaining, enough for perhaps one major sortie. The P-51D represented a technological revolution extending beyond raw performance to an entire philosophy of warfare. It embodied American industrial principles: mass production with quality control, standardization across manufacturers, and iterative improvement based on combat feedback. Every P-51D rolling off the line was effectively identical, with predictable performance and interchangeable parts. Pilots could step into any Mustang and immediately know its handling and instrument layout. Japanese aircraft, increasingly hand-built with variable quality materials and substitute components, exhibited wide performance variations even within the same production batch. One Ki-84 might reach 400 mph, while another from the same factory struggled to exceed 350 mph. Brigadier General Ernest M. Moore, commander of the 7th Fighter Command, later wrote, "I don't believe there is any question that the P-51 was the best propeller fighter of World War II. It was our top air superiority fighter, ideal for escort missions, and equal to the P-47 as a ground attack platform. This judgment reflected not only the aircraft's performance but its reliability, maintainability, and adaptability to the extreme demands of very long-range missions. The P-51 could be refueled and rearmed in 30 minutes, flew twice daily if required, and operated from rough coral runways that would have destroyed more delicate aircraft. Maintenance statistics underscored another facet of American superiority. P-51Ds at Iwima maintained an operational rate above 80% despite harsh conditions, including volcanic dust, corrosive salt air, and minimal facilities. Ground crews could replace engines in 4 hours using mobile cranes and standardized procedures, while battle damage that would ground a Japanese fighter for weeks could be repaired overnight with prefabricated parts shipped from the States. The Ki-84, even when adequately fueled and armed, suffered from serviceability rates below 40%, sometimes dropping to as low as 20%. Its intricate Humar engine demanded specialized tools that were often unavailable, mechanics who had been killed in action or drafted into frontline units, and spare parts that required hand-fitting due to inconsistent manufacturing tolerances. Weather reconnaissance provided a critical advantage that saved countless American lives. Dedicated B-29s conducted weather reconnaissance sorties hours ahead of fighter operations, reporting cloud cover, wind speeds, and frontal systems. These meteorological scouts delivered precise data that allowed planners to route around the worst conditions. Yet, as Black Friday demonstrated, even the most meticulously prepared missions could encounter unexpected weather. Japanese formations, lacking such capabilities, often flew blind into storms that decimated entire squadrons. The American ability to anticipate and avoid adverse weather drastically reduced operational losses, whereas Japanese units suffered catastrophic weather-related casualties exceeding combat losses. The communications network supporting American operations was revolutionary for its era. High-frequency radio beacons transmitted from submarines and island bases, while submarine-based rescue coordination could vector search planes to downed pilots. Real-time weather updates and organized search protocols created a safety net that encouraged pilots to exploit the extreme range of their aircraft. The psychological impact of knowing someone would search for you if you went down cannot be overstated. Japanese aviators, frequently flying without functional radios or hope of rescue, faced each mission with grim fatalism. Farewell ceremonies were literal, as many expected never to return. Captain Harry Krim Jr. of the 531st Fighter Squadron, later an ace with 7 confirmed kills over Japan, summarized the strategic reality bluntly. We owned the skies above Japan. We could strike where and when we wished. The Japanese knew it. Civilians knew it. Every P-51 over Tokyo demonstrated that the war was already lost. Air superiority wasn't something we fought for anymore. We already had it. We were simply showing them. The very long-range missions redefined the strategic calculus in the Pacific, rendering prior assumptions obsolete. Distance could no longer shield the Japanese home islands. The industrial heartland, untouched for 3 years, was suddenly vulnerable to daily strikes. The presence of American fighters over Tokyo obliterated any illusions of Japan's defensive capacity, debunked the myth of the divine wind, and confirmed that defeat was not just likely, but inevitable. The human cost illustrated the technological gap in stark terms. Between July 1st and August 15, 1945, 85 American fighter pilots perished on VLR missions, most due to operational hazards such as weather, mechanical failure, navigation errors, or exhaustion, with only 5 or 6 losses in aerial combat. Japanese pilot casualties in the same period numbered in the hundreds, possibly over 1,000, with entire squadrons annihilated in futile attempts to intercept American formations. The 47th Centi, beginning April with 40 operational pilots, was reduced to just 3 by August, while the 254th Centi was destroyed, reconstituted, and destroyed again. The last dogfights over Japan illustrated the final collapse of Japanese air power. On August 14, 1945, August 15th in Japan, Lieutenant Jerry Yellen flew the war's final combat mission with 19-year-old Second Lieutenant Philip Schlamberg, attacking airfields near Nagoya. The mission had been planned before Japan's surrender broadcast, and recall codes never reached them. Strafing their targets, Yellen and Schlamberg turned for home through cloud cover to evade flak. Emerging from the clouds, Schlamberg had been shot down, marking the last American combat fatality of World War II. Despite Japan's surrender, anti-aircraft positions continued firing, though Japanese fighters were effectively absent, grounded by lack of fuel, pilots, or destroyed entirely. The P-51D Mustang, with its 440 mph top speed, 2,000-mile range with drop tanks, and 6 reliable machine guns carrying nearly 2,000 rounds, rendered the Japanese home islands defenseless against daylight air attack. The Ki-84 Hayate, despite theoretical capabilities and the courage of its pilots, lacked the numbers, reliability, and trained aviators to mount any effective defense. The outcome was determined as much by factories in Detroit and oil wells in Texas as by combat over Tokyo. American industrial strength, embodied in the P-51, achieved what naval blockades and island-hopping campaigns alone could not: the total elimination of Japan's capacity to contest its own airspace. B-29 raids on Hiroshima and Nagasaki flew unescorted, not from lack of fighters but because no opposition remained. Of 3,514 Ki-84s produced, only one survives today at the Chiran Peace Museum in Kagoshima, Japan, a solitary testament to Japan's attempt to match American technological superiority. Hundreds of P-51 Mustangs survive globally, many still flying in air shows, Merlin engines roaring as symbols of American industrial triumph. The contrast in surviving aircraft tells its own story. American planes built for durability, meticulously maintained, treasured as historical artifacts, Japanese aircraft designed for immediate combat use and expendable by design. The shock experienced by Japanese pilots upon encountering P-51s over Tokyo transcended tactical surprise. It revealed the brutal reality that American industrial and technological power could render the impossible routine. Single-engine fighters flying 1,500-mile missions, engaging in combat for hours and returning safely. The P-51D Mustang over Mount Fuji was more than an aircraft. It was the embodiment of industrial supremacy, innovation, and the inexorable mathematics of total war. The lesson was stark. In modern industrial warfare, superior technology multiplied by massive production equals victory. The P-51D represented American industry at its zenith. Over 15,000 aircraft produced with consistent quality, flown by skilled pilots, supported by vast logistics, and deployed with strategic precision. Against this, Japan's Ki-84 Hayate, despite occasional tactical brilliance, had no chance. The sight of American fighters over Tokyo was, in the end, the stark revelation of an unavoidable mathematical truth, a truth that culminated in the atomic devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, delivered by B-29s that no longer required fighter escort because Japanese aerial resistance had effectively vanished. The Mustangs had fulfilled their mission with merciless precision. They demonstrated that distance offered no sanctuary, that industrial capacity outweighed individual valor, and that technological supremacy, when fully exploited, was unbeatable. The Japanese aviators who confronted them in those final months endured the harshest lesson of modern combat. Bravery alone cannot counterbalance the calculations of industrial output, engineering progress, and logistical dominance. The P-51D Mustang soaring over Tokyo symbolized the end of the samurai era, replaced by the era of assembly lines, supercharged engines, and unprecedented long-range fighter support. The myth of the divine wind had been overcome by science, the warrior ethos subdued by manufacturing power, and the empire of the rising sun eclipsed by aluminum wings and steel engines.